A captivating villain is often the lifeblood of conflict in fantasy storytelling. Yet crafting a compelling antagonist in whatever form is a challenge that many new fantasy writers struggle with. Too often, stories fall flat due to antagonist errors that could have been easily avoided. I certainly remember my own stories when starting out more than 20 years ago. Most of my antagonists were an unsatisfying blend of cliches and tropes that resulted in an overdone copy of something pure evil against something almost faultlessly good. But you can avoid that fate, from shallow motivations to forced conflicts. In this video, we'll dive into the 8 most common mistakes I've encountered in fantasy antagonism and how rectifying them can elevate your narrative to new heights. So sit back, relax, and let's tackle this one step at a time. Our journey begins with a critical aspect of any antagonist: their motivations. A compelling antagonist is driven by more than just the desire to oppose the protagonist. Their motivations need depth, a backstory, and a rationale that the audience can understand, if not empathize with. Imagine an antagonist whose sole purpose is to destroy the world. Why do they want to do this? Without a solid reason, their actions feel hollow, their character cartoonish. This is the trap of shallow motivations. Think back to some of the most memorable antagonists. What makes them stand out? It's often their complex motivations. For instance, consider the antagonists who believe they are doing the right thing, like Thanos from the Marvel universe. His goal to eliminate half of all life is horrific, but his motivation to save the universe from overpopulation and resource depletion adds layers to his character. To avoid mistakes in this area, delve into your antagonist's backstory. What shaped their worldview? What past experiences justify their current actions in their mind? Are they driven by fear, revenge, a sense of injustice, or even a twisted notion of love? Also consider how their motivations might evolve over the course of the story. Perhaps they start with a seemingly noble goal that becomes corrupted, or maybe they start with a malicious intent, but then they gain clarity and change. Giving your antagonist rich, well-developed motivations does more than just flesh out their character. It adds depth to the entire narrative and creates a more engaging and thought-provoking conflict for your readers. Next, let's tackle the problem of static antagonists. In a compelling narrative, characters, including antagonists, should evolve. They should adapt, learn, and possibly even change their tactics as the story progresses. An antagonist who remains unchanged from beginning to end can weaken the impact of your story. Imagine an antagonist who starts off powerful and menacing, but doesn't grow or adapt as the story unfolds. While the protagonist evolves, faces trials, and overcomes obstacles, the antagonist remains a one-dimensional figure, stuck in the initial state. This lack of evolution can sap the tension and excitement from your narrative. Dynamic antagonists, on the other hand, are unpredictable and challenging. They keep both the protagonist and the reader on their toes. Consider the character of Dolores Umbridge in the Harry Potter series. She starts as a strict, rule-abiding official, but gradually reveals more sadistic and oppressive layers of her personality, adapting her tactics as she gains more control over Hogwarts. This evolution makes her a formidable and detested antagonist. To avoid creating a static antagonist, ask yourself how they might react to the protagonist's actions. Do they learn from their encounters? Do they modify their strategies? Maybe they become more desperate, more cunning, or even question their own motives. Think about how the antagonist's journey parallels that of the protagonist. Just as the hero grows, the antagonist should also experience their own arc. Whether it's a descent into madness, an escalation in villainy, or an unexpected shift in goals. Our third pitfall is the trap of moral monotony, where antagonists are painted with a simplistic brush of pure evil. In reality, the most memorable and impactful antagonists are those who exhibit shades of moral complexity. When antagonists lack moral ambiguity, they often become predictable and frankly boring. They fail to challenge the protagonist and the audience on a deeper philosophical level. Think of the White Walkers in Game of Thrones. Initially intriguing, their lack of clear motivation and moral complexity ultimately made them less compelling as antagonists. Conversely, consider antagonists like Magneto from the X-Men series or Jaime Lannister from Game of Thrones. They are not purely evil. Their actions, while morally questionable, stem from understandable motivations and personal traumas. This complexity makes them unpredictable and fascinating. To steer clear of moral monotony, consider giving your antagonist a background and motivations that, while possibly flawed, are relatable or understandable. They might have noble goals, but pursue them through questionable means. Or perhaps they have been shaped by past experiences, leading them to their current path. An antagonist that challenges the protagonist's sense of morality, and by extent that of the audience, makes for a richer and more engaging story. It forces the readers to think and question their own values and beliefs. Creating a morally complex antagonist also opens the door to explore themes of redemption and transformation, adding an additional layer to the narrative. Now, if you found anything useful in the video so far, please consider giving it a like to help me grow this channel. Thank you. The fourth mistake that new fantasy writers often make is creating a disjointed conflict, where the antagonist's involvement in the story feels superficial or unconnected to the main narrative. This disconnection can deflate the tension and reduce the overall impact of the story. In crafting a fantasy tale, the antagonist should not just be a distant threat or a mere obstacle. Their actions, goals, and presence should be intimately tied to the protagonist's journey and the central conflict of the story. Take for example Darth Vader in Star Wars. His personal connection to Luke Skywalker adds depth to their conflict, making it not just a battle of good versus evil, but a deeply personal struggle. When the antagonist's goals and actions directly impact the protagonist's world, choices, and development, it elevates the story. This direct engagement makes the conflict feel more immediate and personal. It's not just about defeating an evil force, it's about overcoming a deeply intertwined adversary who challenges the protagonist on multiple levels. Avoid having your antagonist operate in a vacuum. Ensure that their actions have direct consequences on the protagonist and the world they inhabit. This connection makes the story more cohesive and the conflict more compelling. To avoid making mistakes in this area, consider how your antagonist can be a catalyst for the protagonist's growth and decisions. How do their actions directly impact the protagonist's world, beliefs, and journey? This integration makes for a more unified and impactful narrative. The fifth major pitfall is the reliance on cliches when crafting antagonists. This reliance can lead to predictable and one-dimensional villains that fail to engage and surprise readers. In the realm of fantasy, cliches like the Dark Lord seeking world domination, the evil sorcerer with a thirst for power, or the vengeful spirit wreaking havoc are all too common. These stereotypes can be tempting to use as they provide a ready-made template. However, they often lack depth and originality, making your story feel derivative and uninspired. Sometimes it can be worth challenging yourself to subvert these cliches. For example, what if the Dark Lord is actually a benevolent ruler misunderstood by the world? Or the evil sorcerer is driven by a noble cause, but his methods are morally ambiguous? These simple twists can already add layers of complexity to your antagonist, making them more intriguing and less predictable. Another approach is to mix different traits and motivations to create a unique antagonist. Instead of a purely evil villain, craft a character with relatable flaws, compelling backstory, or unexpected virtues. This blend can make your antagonist more human and believable, even if they are a fantastical being. By steering clear of overusing cliches, or by twisting them in innovative ways, you create antagonists that stand out in the crowded fantasy landscape. They become memorable characters that resonate with readers rather than forgettable caricatures. The sixth common mistake is presenting an antagonist that is inherently weaker or less capable than the protagonist. This creates a lack of genuine tension and diminishes the story's conflict, making the protagonist's journey less engaging and the resolution less satisfying. A well-crafted antagonist should be a formidable force, capable of genuinely challenging the protagonist. They should pose a threat that pushes the hero to their limits, testing their strengths and exposing their weaknesses. If the antagonist is easily overcome or lacks the means to seriously challenge the protagonist, the story loses its dramatic tension. To avoid this pitfall, ensure that your antagonist is on an equal or higher power level than your protagonist. This doesn't necessarily mean they need to be stronger in a physical or magical sense. Their strength could lie in their cunning, resources, influence, or control over critical aspects of the world. Think of your antagonist as the hero's ultimate test. They should be a character that can outsmart, outmaneuver, or overpower their protagonist in significant ways. This opposition forces the protagonist to grow, adapt, and overcome significant obstacles, making the eventual triumph or failure more meaningful and earned. Consider giving your antagonist an advantage that the protagonist must work hard to counteract. It could be superior knowledge, a strategic position, or a powerful artifact. This forces the protagonist to be creative, resourceful, and determined in their quest. The seventh mistake, often made by new fantasy writers, is crafting antagonists with unclear objectives. Antagonists with vague or overly complex goals can confuse readers and weaken the overall narrative tension. An antagonist's objectives should be as clear and compelling as those of the protagonist. A common trap is creating a villain whose plans are mysterious for the sake of mystery itself. While a certain level of intrigue can be valuable, it is vital that the reader understands, at least to some extent, what the antagonist is trying to achieve. Their goals should be coherent and logically aligned with their motivations and actions throughout the story. When the antagonist's objectives are unclear or continually shifting without explanation, it can lead to a disjointed and unsatisfying story. Readers may struggle to understand the stakes or the reasons behind the conflict, which can diminish their investment in the story. To craft clear objectives for your antagonist, start by asking fundamental questions. What does the antagonist want? Why do they want it? How far are they willing to go to achieve it? The answers should be woven into the narrative, providing the readers with a solid understanding of the antagonist's drive. The antagonist's goals don't have to be revealed all at once, they can unfold gradually. However, by the climax, the reader should have a clear picture of what the antagonist is fighting for. The last common mistake is forced conflict. This occurs when antagonists take actions that feel contrived or illogical, serving only to advance the plot. It's as if the antagonist solely exists to create problems for the protagonist, without any real believable motive or strategy. Forced conflicts often arise from a lack of depth in character development or a misunderstanding of the antagonist's role. When every move an antagonist makes is solely to obstruct the protagonist, the story loses its authenticity. It can feel as if the antagonist is just a plot device, rather than a fully realized character with their own agenda. The key to avoiding forced conflict is to ensure that all actions taken by the antagonist align with the established motivations, capabilities, and personality. Their decisions should feel like natural extensions of who they are, not just obstacles for the protagonist to overcome. To create believable conflicts, ask yourself, does this action make sense for the antagonist at this moment in the story? Are their decisions consistent with their goals and character? If the answer is no, it's time to revisit the drawing board. Remember, a good antagonist challenges the protagonist in meaningful ways, pushing them to grow and adapt. Their actions should stem from a place of purpose and intention, adding depth and complexity to your story. Now, warfare is often a crucial part of a story's conflict. Check out this video here to safeguard yourself against 8 warfare mistakes that could undermine your efforts in creating a compelling antagonist.